Hey Scott, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I've been a fan of your stuff for years, but I was trying to figure out if we've ever met. I knew Justin and I know Kelly Vlahos from Anti-War, but I'm not sure we ever have met.
Yeah, I don't spend too much time traveling around. I guess after the last book came out, I did a little bit of a speaking tour there, but I haven't done a lot of the big events and those kinds of things too much. Starting to now more and more, I guess.
Yeah, and so let's start with. I wanted to get into this and assume that people don't know a lot about your work, and I wanted to speak specifically to conservatives and people that may have gotten into the movement as neocons and progressives that are now into this sort of humanitarian nation building stuff. And I want to take it down to a level where people that would have sort of an instinctual, we have to do something attitude towards foreign policy can kind of get where us libertarian non-interventionists are coming from.
Mhm.
And I definitely want to talk about your new book, but maybe we could just talk a little bit about your work generally and what you do on the Scott Horton show and what you do at antiwar.com and give people a general overview of that stuff first.
Yeah. Well, at antiwar.com, our ethic has always been that even though we're libertarians at the core that run the thing, that we are a single issue, and the issue isn't libertarianism. The issue is non-interventionism. And so we're happy to feature the very best of the left and right and whoever you got, as long as, their arguments are sound in favor of non-intervention. And there's always a lot of great stuff, along those lines. But at the same time, I think out in the world, the biggest problem in American politics is partisanship. It's just the mind killer. And it's what's funny is, as a libertarian, to me, is I'm against both sides so much that I totally empathize with both sides for hating the other side more. Like, listen, I got to be a right winger because I sure as hell ain't a left winger. Like, I understand that, dude. You know what I mean? That's perfectly reasonable response to the left, and vice versa too. I'm clearly not one of them. I must be over here. And those guys are definitely worse. So I guess I'll have to settle for these guys to protect me from those guys. And that's just how it works. But then, it's a feedback loop kind of thing. And the more you're on the team, the deeper your identification with the team gets. And then any criticism of anything that your side does is taken as a criticism from the other side that must be defended, and heels dig in and knees jerk and everybody gets mad. So my thing is, I'm a libertarian. I don't give a damn about the Republicans and the Democrats at all, and I'm against them all, but I'm fair to everybody. I don't lie, I don't twist, I don't make up silly nicknames for everybody to ridicule them or whatever, right? I just tell you what Hillary Clinton did that I disapprove of, and John McCain too. Usually the same thing, right? And then, as I learned this driving a cab long ago, Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center named it the Scott Horton rule, is as a libertarian to explain libertarianism to liberals and conservatives or leftists and rightists of whatever description. You attack the left from the left and the right from the right, because we have well, I put it this way. Anything that the leftists are good on, we're even better. And anything the right wingers are good on, we're even better. It's not that we're really to the right or the left of them. It's just we've really thought all of this stuff through. So like a great left wing issue would be ending the war on drugs. Well, we absolutely agree with that, but we're like the nth degree crystallization of the perfection of that argument about the war on drugs. But if you want to attack the left from the left, what you do is you hold hands all the way on the drug war argument, and then you change the subject to guns. And you say, now, isn't it true that it's poor and minorities who end up doing prison time just for possession of a gun when they weren't allowed to, who everybody in the whole neighborhood has a felony, so now none of them are allowed to own a gun. Now anybody with a gun has to go to the pen, and for simple possession. And isn't it the case that making it illegal just means that criminals are in charge of distributing the guns, the most dangerous ones of all? And don't all our same arguments about the war on drugs apply to the war on guns? And doesn't it just not make sense to have a war on guns run by a government that you hate and fear, right? And cops who you say are all Klansmen. Like let's not do this. You thought that was a left-wing issue, but it wasn't. If you really, a real leftist is against gun control, right? And that way, so I'm not asking you to change your identity. I'm not asking you to become a libertarian. I'm not asking you to become a right-wing, duck hunting gun nut. I'm just saying it's perfectly left-wing to oppose gun control if you're left-wing and smart. And then the same thing for a right-winger. If you're a good right-winger, then you value the Constitution and capitalism, limited government, property rights, which all require sound money. If you're a real good right-winger, you want to help us abolish the IRS, repeal the 16th Amendment, never have income taxation again. Well, I'm sorry, Charlie, you can't have a limited republic and a world empire at the same time. You're going to have to choose. And if you want a limited republic for the United States of America, you're just going to have to let Iraq go, and Israel too, for that matter. And because you can't have it both ways. And so what's more important to you? And by the way, the more the war state distorts our economic system and necessitates our funny money and the boom and bust cycle we suffer every 10 or 12 years when the economy collapses, the more the left half of American society, from your point of view, stage left, the more the left half of society moves toward Bernie Sanders and Karl Marx, right? And get further and further radicalized against what they call capitalism, when it's actually the distortions of our government in all of the means of production and, right down to the very money itself. The dollars we use are themselves. So that's my thing. And, like when we're talking about the wars, if you lean a little bit right, then just pretend along with me. When I say Ronald Reagan, just pretend I said Jimmy Carter did 12 years. What difference does it make? And then after Carter came Bill Clinton. And then after Bill Clinton came Hillary and Barack. And it was all Democrats this whole time. That way I don't have to hurt your feelings because you remember liking Ronald Reagan with your dad back a long time ago or something. Okay, fine. Forget your feelings. It was all Democrats who did all the terrible things that I'm going to say here in a minute, right? And then if you lean a little bit left, no, it was all the Republicans. You know what? Forget Jimmy Carter starting all this stuff. It was Ronald Reagan, mean old Ronald Reagan, him and the Bushes. And then you know what? Bush did 8 years and then his son did 12 and then Trump. And it was all Republicans all along who did these horrible things. So now you don't have to be upset that I'm criticizing a president that you had some emotional connection to. I'm not criticizing America, the country, or the 300 million Americans who are basically the captives and victims of these people, just the same as the Iraqis are, right? It's just, what? The Clintons made bad decisions sometimes. Who could argue with that? That's all it is we're talking about here.
So I was listening to the pod you just did with Dave Smith, and he made a point. He was defending Nancy Pelosi for having voted against the Iraq War. And it struck me that in her case, I suspect that was a purely partisan position, and it wasn't a moral position or a philosophical position. She was voting against a Republican administration. And I was thinking about, and I'm not specifically picking on her because I think foreign policy is largely a partisan thing that ends up producing the same thing regardless of who sits in the White House. But I'm thinking of something that Thomas Massey likes to say, the congressman from Kentucky. He's a friend of the show and kind of a libertarian Republican, liberty Republican, whatever you want to call him. And he likes to say, when he's explaining why he can work with Tulsi Gabbard and why he can work with Ro Khanna and other anti-war Democrats, he's like, Matt, I'm not a partisan. I'm an ideologue, and I can find common ground with Bernie Sanders on this one question of interventionism. I can find lots of ground with someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who's not a typical left progressive. She's more complex than that. And it struck me that this fight, not just on one issue, like you're describing on all of these issues, is probably between people that are working from a set of principles, no matter how, they might not be all the right principles from our perspective, versus those that just view this as a partisan war where defeating the other side, regardless of what your side is doing, is the end goal.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, in other words, there's the people who are in it for themselves, and then there's the rest of society. We're trying to save our society from these people who are completely destroying it, running it in the ground. And you're completely right, by the way, about Nancy Pelosi, that in 2002, the Democrats were in the minority in the House. So it was perfectly safe for her to vote against the thing and grandstand about it. Meanwhile, the Democrats were in the majority in the Senate, and led by Joe Biden and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton, they all voted for it and caused the war. And by the way, they could have stopped it. I mean, you play the counterfactual right there instead of being George W. Bush's handmaiden. If Joe Biden had any moral courage at all as the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee to say, this is crazy. There's no way we're doing this. You're wrong. And this isn't true. And that's not true. And here's my experts to debunk yours. As I say in the new book, all you had to do was call General Zinni, the previous commander of Central Command, to come in and say, none of this is true. I don't have a nuclear. Oh, yeah, no, they have a Manhattan Project in Iraq. We just don't know where it is. Yeah, okay. That's all he needed to do. And instead he, helped George Bush lies into the whole thing. But yeah, that's right. And then, both sides, I saw a great meme the other day that was the Ring of Power from the Lord of the Rings, that it's each party when they're out of power, destroy the ring, destroy it. And the other party, no. And then they switch back and forth, and things only get worse and worse and worse. And there's never, more libertarian or Republican than when they don't have any power. Boy, they'll tell you how anti-government they are and how pro-freedom they are and how pro-free market they are. And something's got to be done about this deficit, Matt. I'll tell you what, until the moment they have the power in their hands, and then they do everything they accuse the Democrats of doing and more. I mean, and it's no secret too. It's been libertarian economists have documented this for years, that the Republicans always vastly increase spending in the deficit far more than the Democrats dare to, and which has held true this whole century long.
Yeah. Certainly the last, the first 2 years of the Trump administration, before all of these $1 trillion emergencies, was the most expansive spending that I think I've seen in my lifetime.
Yep. And I think Obama beat Bush, but only after Bush had left Clinton in the dust. And then Obama came in and did the big, $6 trillion stimulus thing, at the start of the crash there. But then after that, it was, I think, less and less. They still spend $1 trillion a year on the military, still $4 trillion a year instead of 6 or whatever, but still. Yeah, it's totally out of control.
So let's, a previous book. So your new book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I want to spend a lot of time talking about that. But a previous book was a collection of your interviews with Ron Paul, called The Great Ron Paul. And it goes back to 2004. Was he kind of your gateway into this view, or were you already a libertarian when you met him?
I was already a libertarian. By the time that I learned about Ron Paul, my big Ron Paul moment was 10 years before everybody else's with the big, Rudy Giuliani moment in the spring of 2007. Mine was in 1997. And I already knew about Harry Brown and had voted Harry Brown for president in 96. And, I was more interested in like New World Order conspiracy theory type stuff at the time, but I wasn't a right winger like all the Birchers and the militia guys and whatever. But I was more interested in that kind of stuff. And the libertarian movement didn't seem to talk about that kind of thing very much. So I wasn't as interested in that. But I was always a libertarian and not, conservative or anything like that. But then I saw, it's so funny. The first time I saw Ron Paul, I'll never forget, is, I'm almost certain it was the middle of the night, C-SPAN reruns. And it's Ron Paul speaking to an empty House of Representatives. And it's just him and the temporary Speaker of the House. And he's saying, Mr. Speaker, I have here in my hands these documents that I got. They're published by the British press today. And this shows the final evidence that George Bush, and this is 97, so George Bush meant senior, previous, right? That George Bush was selling weapons to Saddam Hussein right up into the invasion of Iraq, right up until the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. And you know what? I just think this goes to show that we should not be doing this kind of thing. Now, I'm a Texan, and I know that George Bush is not really a Texan, but nominally he is, and senior we're talking about here. He's a huge force in the Republican Party in Texas at that time, of course, and all the powerful Houston oil men and corporate, chieftains and all these things. This is the whole crew. And then, so I'm watching this thing. I look at the bottom of the screen. It says R, Texas. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. A Republican from Texas is accusing Bush Sr. of selling weapons to Saddam Hussein up until the eve of the invasion of Kuwait. Like, that's pretty bad, and that's pretty courageous of him. And then, of course, he's such a wonderful guy. He's so good on everything, too, that, I remember, and It's because of the time and place. That's how I know, how good I was on this stuff back then. I remember it had to have been 1997 because I drive my Roy's taxi. They wouldn't let me drive for yellow because I wasn't 21 yet. So I'm driving for Roy's taxi and telling people in my cab that, like, no, see, the housing thing is a big bubble. It's all because of this money and all, fake funny money. Now, of course, I'm like 10 years ahead of the curve. So what I should have been telling everybody was get in on the bubble now instead of it's a big bubble, stay out of it. What the hell did I know? But I knew it was a big bubble because of Ron Paul. And I knew that after the crash happened in 99 and 2000 with the dot-coms and the NASDAQ and all of that, it was him that I was parroting, telling people in my cab that, don't worry, or don't make the mistake of thinking that real estate is fine. It's a bubble too. It's just that one hasn't popped yet and all this stuff. And I've learned from him. And then, of course, on foreign policy, every time the guy opened his mouth from 1997 through 1999, if he ever talked about the Middle East in any context, I mean, 9 out of 10 times at least, he would say, this policy makes us more vulnerable to terrorist attacks in the United States as we provoke enemies by doing what we're doing, occupying bases in Saudi to bomb Iraq. Mr. Speaker, if the Saudis are warning us this week that we're driving their crazies crazy, maybe we ought to get the hell out of there before something bad happens, don't you think? That's Ron Paul, 1997, 1998, 1999, when Bill Clinton was impeached. He goes, well, of course, I'm voting for the impeachment, but what I'm really mad is what he's doing right now with the Operation Desert Fox bombing campaign, December 98, which Clinton began, I love this, the day after the Judiciary Committee had voted the articles of impeachment for the full House to begin debating. Bill Clinton started a war against a little mini, 2-week air raid campaign against Iraq that he named after Erwin Rommel, for God's sake. Like, what in the world? How did that? Anyway. And Ron Paul's railing at the C-SPAN camera. I want him impeached for this. He doesn't have the right to bomb Iraq. Only Congress can declare war against a sovereign nation. And he's going to cause increased terrorism against the United States of America. So all he was right, and all I had to do was pay attention to obviously the sharpest guy on the Hill by far. Not just that I agree with in libertarian terms, but who has his premises correct about what's going on around here and what are the likely consequences in a way that nobody else would. And there were other rogues in the Congress, right? Jim Traficant or Dennis Kucinich or whatever. None of them had their act together like Ron Paul when it came to what we're really doing and what it really means and the risks we're really taking, all through in the lead up to September 11th. No question.
So you're a Ron Paul kid before it was cool.
Absolutely.
And before this conversation, I was trying to dig up some I'm sure I'd be embarrassed by them today, but I wrote a bunch of pieces in 90, whatever it was, the invasion of Kuwait. I was probably the only, and at the time I had just moved I air my dirty laundry here. I just moved from the Republican National Committee to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And so I was writing these things without affiliation, and there really wasn't a place to publish anti-war stuff that I could find at the time, but it was all of my intellectual allies were sort of hippie anti-war protesters. And I went to the protests, and, there was Pat Buchanan, but I didn't really know that crowd. And Ron Paul was the only guy back then, but eventually he made skepticism of nation building and all that stuff more mainstream, but still well within the minority in both political parties.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a New York Times article about Robert Malley. He's the new, former Bill Clintonite who worked for Obama and then is now Joe Biden's special envoy to Iran. In the article in the New York Times, it's like out of the mouths of babes kind of thing. They're so cynical. They don't even realize how bad they sound to us sometimes kind of thing. And they say, well, Malley, they quote him, saying, we've gone here and here and here. We caused all this chaos. We tried it this way. We tried it this way. We tried it this way. It didn't work. I'm not really sure this is the right thing. I don't know. And then from there, they say, talk like that more and more really reflects the attitude of the American people, especially after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were total failures, and smaller interventions like Somalia and Libya. I'm like, hey, this is pretty good for the New York Times. Somalia and Libya also really didn't work out either. But it's that kind of talk that really earns Malley enemies in Washington, D.C. Oh, they hate it for this guy to admit that the last 20 years has been a disaster at their hands. And the knives are out for him, not because he's wrong, but because they're wrong. Simple as that.
Yeah,
And
they can't have anyone sort of admit that, because then there would potentially be a reckoning, which is bipartisan. Both
right.
teams, as you document this, and let's pivot to the book. And I want to start with a question, and this is a sort of a libertarian thing. It strikes me that anytime the political class declares a war on something, they create more of it. So we've declared a war on terrorism, and we can get into blowback and all that. We got more terrorism. We got more destability and all that stuff. The war on drugs creates more and more dangerous drugs and more death by drugs. The war on opioids did the same thing. The war on poverty has created this huge poverty industrial complex, but it's not at all clear that it's helped anyone rise out of poverty. Explain, is sort of a public choice reason why this happens. Why is every war leading to another war, and why do anti-war presidents like Barack Obama end up just expanding the war state?
Yeah, no, so that's a great way to frame it, and I think that that's the correct context, is that the military is not the exception to the rule. The military also is a government program. In fact, it's the biggest government program. And so just like the DEA, or just like the Department of, Housing and Urban Development, or whatever, Great Society type agencies, they have a need to continue to exist. The last thing they want to do is put themselves out of business by solving a problem. They're in business. And in fact, their incentive is to, if the problem is solved even without them, then they'll come up with a new reason for the same thing they're already doing. And especially like in terms of military bases around the world. Well, the USSR is gone. So we don't need our secret outpost in Austria anymore, do we? Sure we do, because you know what? There could be a pipeline might come through here the wrong direction, or somebody might try to sell some drugs, or somebody's going to come up with a reason why we got to keep whichever secret base or open base, wherever it's hidden. And the military themselves, they call it a self-licking ice cream cone. The whole Pentagon, the whole project is a self-licking ice cream cone, which means a program in search of a reason to exist. And just like with the New York Times right there, sort of out of the mouths of babes thing, when they don't realize how corrupt this is, because it's just the system. It's how it is. This is the American way. That they'll admit, and I quote in the book, where they say, well, after the big drawdowns from Iraq and Afghanistan, we're looking for things to do. So we're going to Africa because we got to find ways to stay globally engaged, which is all just another way of saying we don't want to have to get jobs. There's no enemies out here to defend the American people from. Their lives and liberty are not in danger, so we can climb down off the wall. We can, close down our fire base and come home and spend this money on productive uses. Nah. What lieutenant colonel who wants to be a full-bird colonel is going to go along with a program like that? What two-star general who wants 3 is going to go along with a program like that? And what incentive does a congressman have, or a think tanker have, or an arms dealer have, or a media anchor head have to, come down on the good side of any of this? All of their incentives are to keep it all going at the expense of everyone else. Again, as the New York Times says, the American people don't want the wars or anything. But of course, the experts know that it's got to be this way. Yeah, well, I'm not so sure of that. And in fact, I'm a Jeffersonian in the sense that as long as we have this federal republic, the possibly not wisest, but still the best depository of the power is with the people. It's their sons who got to go get their legs blown off in this thing, not the people in the House and the Senate, not the people at the think tanks or, the neoconservative magazines. They don't do the fighting. So if the parents of the infantry are over it, then it sounds to me like those are your orders, General. Because this is this is America, the USA, where the people are in charge, and these people supposedly work for us rather than they're our warlords, they're our overlords, and we're their subjects. Or I know I'm being naive, but I'm just being facetious, really, because I do know better.
Yeah, talk about this ecosystem, and it gets this. And let's talk to conservatives right now, because constitutional conservatives are rightly skeptical of, and now we call it the deep state, but just, government bureaucrats that can't be fired. Sure. And the inevitable, and, Ronald Reagan said something to the effect of that, there's no such thing as a temporary government program. Right. And it's sort of public choice 101. Once you create a program, you end up creating jobs, and you create an ecosystem where there's all sorts of corporate interests that help fight that particular war, whatever it is, and it creates an economy, and everybody's got to keep their jobs, and everybody's got to grow their income and all that sort of stuff. That same, and I would call it government failure, but that same government failure specifically applies, and most desperately perhaps applies to those functions that conservatives think are legitimate, like national defense. And it's a divide between the generals and the troops. It's a divide between Congress and the people. But that corporate aspect, the Lockheed Martins of the world, it strikes me that that's sort of the rocket fuel, no pun intended, that keeps the whole system rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the generals and the admirals too. I mean, getting an extra star, an extra thingy on your shoulder, and access to a better golf course in Hawaii, and a bigger pension, a better seat on a better board of directors when you retire. All these kinds of things are also absolutely huge, and in the intelligence services too. Like, so to go back about, conservatives are ready to hear this about the deep state a little bit. Well, why is that? It's because the FBI Counterintelligence Division and the CIA framed our most recent president for high treason with the Kremlin, of all things. And they just framed him. They falsely accused him. They set up his people and trapped his people into perjury traps and all these things. They leaked 100 fake stories to the media throughout. And for 3 years, they pretended that the president of the United States, starting with the major party already nominated candidate for president of the United States, who they framed, then the president-elect, then the president himself, for 3 years through, continued to insist to the American people that it was true that this guy was a traitor. And who was it that set him up? The FBI Counterintelligence Division and the CIA were the ones who did all the lying. So you talk about unaccountable bureaucrats who can't be fired. This is the Gestapo. This is the secret police. Now, look, if J. Edgar Hoover is doing something horrible and wrong when he uses COINTELPRO against poor black activists in Oakland, then what does it mean when the FBI does that to the president of the United States of America? Just an outright frame-up counterintelligence program hit job like what they did. Well, what got us to this? What got us this? Go back, rewind. Again, we don't even need to bring in the Democrats on this. It was Ike Eisenhower. And we all learned this. This is the acceptable conspiracy theory. It's a shade of a conspiracy theory you're allowed to believe in because Ike Eisenhower said it. He was a 5-star general. He was the commander of all Supreme Allied United Nations forces in Europe in World War II. And then he became the 8-year, 2-term president of the United States of America. And he was, famously said, God help the next president trying to control the U.S. Army and what these guys want to do. And he gave his Cross of Iron speech where he said, don't think this is all free. Every battleship we make is a couple of schools we didn't build. Every missile we put together is people going hungry. And don't think there's not a trade-off here. 5-star general, president of the United States talking like this, Republican saying this. And then on his last day in power, he said, you know what? Sorry to leave you guys in the lurch like this, but there is essentially a new combination of power that has defeated the U.S. Constitution, that has already subverted democracy, and it's too late for you to do anything about it. Good luck. And he called it was just the military-industrial complex. Famously, he wanted to add congressional, but people would thought that he thought, or his advisor, somebody said to him, that sounds like a little bit too much like you want a more supreme executive over the Congress, which isn't the argument, right? It's just the argument is that Congress is so corrupted by these arms dealers It doesn't cost much to run a congressional campaign. We're talking about, pennies on the dollar, not even. We're talking the slightest remainder on the checks they're cashing that they have to recycle into the system to put their congressmen back in power. And then nowadays things have gotten more sophisticated, of course, with all of the think tanks and all that. But, the Council on Foreign Relations was founded by the Morgan Group in the first place, and then was taken over by the Rockefellers. That was the first big think tank. And then from there, let 1,000 think tanks bloom, right? And, Andrew Coburn was so bright on this. I'm not sure if he's the first one to coin this or not. I think he is. He told me that, the best way really to understand the neoconservative movement is it's the nexus between the new right military industrial complex and the Israel lobby in Washington, D.C., because the bankers and the oil men already had the Council on Foreign Relations to come up with all of their policies, basically, the waspy wasp for like 80 years straight or something. But the military industrial complex guys who are from California and Washington State and Texas and all this, they like making weapons and they talk tough, but they need eggheads to come up with studies and policy papers and rationalizations for all the weapons that they're making. And the Israel lobby's full of eggheads. So they said, here's what we'll do. We'll just, merge our power together. And so if you look at, all of the worst of the neoconservative institutes, like the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, or they changed it to For America now, but the Center for Security Policy, the American Enterprise Institute, obviously back then the Project for a New American Century and the Foreign Policy Initiative, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. All these guys they're paid by Lockheed and Northrop Grumman. And it's all just a rationalization so that they can sell weapons to the U.S. military, to the American taxpayer captive market. And it's just a racket. It's as simple as that. It's almost too old to invoke now. It doesn't have the punch that it should. That it was Smedley Butler that said war is a racket. And he was, a 4-star general, most decorated officer of his era, U.S. Marine Corps general. And he wasn't asking you. He was telling you. He was the authoritative documentarian of the thing because he was the commanding officer in charge for 25 years. Here's how we do it. Wall Street orders us into action. We kill people, we steal their property, and then we put somebody else in charge, and then we move somewhere else. That's not defending the United States of America, and that was a long time ago. That's back before the World Wars, But or I guess he wrote that after World War I guess.
So one thing that's always, I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to this question, but one thing I've always tried to figure out, I was not a Trump supporter, but clearly that military industrial complex you're describing here was expecting that Hillary Clinton would take office and would be sort of the status quo, keep the machine rolling forward. And so they panicked about Donald Trump, who actually ran mostly as an anti-war candidate. Did he believe that, or was that just the guy who's a marketing genius seeing where the American people are? Because he originally endorsed the war in Iraq, but by the time he was on stage with Jeb Bush, he was the strongest voice on that stage against it. Did he believe that stuff?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit hard to parse. I mean, first of all, by the time he's denouncing Iraq War II, everybody knows we shouldn't have done Iraq War II. And in fact, the major event of the campaign season. I'm sorry?
Except Jeb Bush, of course.
Yeah, except Jeb Bush.
Yeah.
But yeah, the major, advent in this narrative of the campaign season of 2015 and 16 was when he went to South Carolina and he said, his brother lied us into war. It was a total disaster. We shouldn't have done it. And a veteran in the crowd is like, man, take back that they lied us into war. I like the syllogism. I fought over there. Take back that they lied us into it. I'm like, really? Well, okay. That makes a lot of logical sense. And Trump did back down, but he said, oh, well, maybe it was an accident or something, but he still said it. And then the next day he got 2/3 of the vote and the other 17 candidates split the remaining third. And so that was it. And that was in South Carolina, the most heavily militarized state in the union, with, I'm guessing, very close to, if not the highest per capita, veterans of the 21st century wars living in that state. And he got up there and essentially said, listen, we all renounce the Bush's wars, don't we, everybody? And they said, yeah, we do. And he had to do that to defeat Jeb, to say, I mean, here was the obvious thing to hang around Jeb's neck, is you're George Bush's brother. Why would anybody listen to you? Shove. And it worked, because of course, and then Jeb, they asked him, well, what about Iraq War II? And he goes, well, the Iraq War was a pretty good deal. He hadn't practiced at all what he was going to say about this at all. He didn't even think anyone was going to ask him about Iraq War II, and he was an exceptionally lousy candidate and the only one really standing in Trump's way. And so that was a huge part of how he had to destroy him, was by renouncing the Bush legacy. And frankly, the Republican Party was never going to win again as long as they were running Rubios and McCain's and Romney's who wanted to double Guantanamo and, go after Iran next too and all that. The people are over it. The New York Times is right. In fact, as the polls show, the American people say, in answer to the question, should we have ever fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? The American people say no by about like 60%, 62. The veterans of the Iraq and Afghan wars, they say no at like 65, 67%, ahead of the curve of the rest of the American people. So talk about thank you for your service. I respect you for your sacrifice. Well, they want to end the war. So how about that? And that's them speaking for themselves too. I'm just reading the results.
Yeah. And veterans were a disproportionate part of the Ron Paul movement because they actually understood in a very visceral way the cost of these social experiments.
And in fact, in 2012, I'm not sure if this is true for 2008, but in 2012, Ron Paul raised more money from active duty and military veterans than all the other candidates in the race combined, including Barack Obama on the other side. And, so if dollars were votes and it was the veterans who chose, it was the anti-war Republican was the one that they wanted. What does that tell you? But now, as far as Trump, no, he never meant it. Just like this is a talent. I don't know how great of a talent it is. I guess it's pretty good if you can get people to believe you. But he would say, listen, we have to cut Social Security. These deficits are out of control. It's irresponsible. I'm the greatest champion of Social Security in the whole world. Oh, I'm anti-war. These wars are terrible. You killed all these people and wasted all this money. We didn't even get anything out of it. I'm going to kill them all. I'm going to kill their families. I'm going to torture them. I don't even care if we get good intelligence. They deserve to be tortured anyway. We're going to wage a war of annihilation. So if you're like a Republican and you lean a little Jeffersonian and Ron Paulian, then he's got something for you. You lean a little Jacksonian and a little macho tough guy, Southerner, boy, he's got some of that for you too. And just whatever you need to hear, he said something a lot like what you think at least a couple of times. If you want to believe, there's something for you to believe in there. If you want to be a skeptic, then come on, man. The guys, boiled hot dogs are the best. No, grilled. Whatever it is you want to hear at any given time. You don't care, Yeah,
it's kind of a either a caricature or a distillation of what every single politician does. But the one thing he figured out is that he could give everybody what they wanted. And apparently the human mind will sort of sort through that and glom onto something that sort of makes you hopeful that maybe this time he will get us out of Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And that was
one more thing about that is, and this goes to Trump's entire character, is that he is really not one of them. I mean, and to be one of them, you're supposed to be a senator or a governor or a vice president and so thoroughly vetted and a member of all the right groups and friends with all the right people and already in on the consensus. And he just wasn't. And, I saw this great interview with Al Sharpton in 2015. And he goes, listen, you people from out there in the country, you might not understand this. So let me explain this to you. Donald Trump isn't from New York. Donald Trump is from Queens. And that means to the guys in Manhattan, he's poor white trash scum. And they hate him. And they've always hated him. And all he ever wanted was to be liked by them. And so he hates them back because they never will accept him. And so, he's a real estate tycoon, right? He's not really born rich in a way. I mean, his father had made some money and whatever, but he was not like the son of famous very like skull and bones wealth from the late 19th century or whatever. And he is so very uncouth and narcissistic and whatever. So he made his fortune mostly on TV rather even than in buying and selling buildings, or much of it. And so when he got to DC, it was like if they were telling you, we need you to believe in America's mystical destiny to lead mankind. Can you do that for us? And you're like, well, I mean, no, I didn't believe in that yesterday, but you're telling me like that's the prerequisite for the job of American president is I have to be like the crusading salesman for the American empire? And Donald Trump just does, all he wanted was for people to play Hail to the Chief. You know what I mean? He won't care about stuff like that. He doesn't really believe in anything at all. So now he's supposed to believe in America's mystical destiny and then anyone could think of this the same lines as him as long as you get a chance to. As long as the argument is ever even brought up, you'll agree with him in an instant. Him and Doug Bondo and every genius in America. Why are we defending Germany and Japan and South Korea that are all extremely prosperous capitalist countries? In many ways, are commercial competitors or whatever, if you're an economic nationalist about it at all. Why do we have these giant military garrisons there and spend all this extra money defending these countries from threats they don't even face? We got to browbeat the Germans into spending more money on their military when they don't have use for a military because they know the Russians aren't coming. There's no reason for a Cold War. Otherwise, they'd be building up their tank forces right now, wouldn't they? But they can't be bothered to. But then we got to insist, you got to buy more tanks, Germany. Why? Just because our government's run by tank salesmen. That's the only reason why. And so now tell Donald Trump that this is our mystical destiny, is to sell tanks to Germany. And he's just not down for it. He doesn't believe in it. And then, I think it was Dave Smith that pointed out that this was the real disgrace, was when he went on the Bill O'Reilly show. And Bill O'Reilly said, yeah, but you want to get along with Russia, but Vladimir Putin's a murderer. And Trump goes, come on, you think we're so innocent? And to them, I mean, that's like saying the Pope is the devil and the whole religion's canceled. You just can't do that. You can't do that. Be the president of the United States who goes around saying that, yes, our government is just as evil as any other government, maybe worse. Everybody knows that, as long as you're not pretending it ain't, And why is it, Matt, by the way, that Martin Luther King can say so and everybody can quote it and everybody knows it was true when he said it? America is the greatest the U.S. government is the greatest purveyor of violence on the face of the earth. Who's second place? It's not even close. There's not even a contest. Who else is at war anywhere in the world but us? Where is there a war anywhere in the world that we're not in on? Even in the Congo, you got American corporate interests and mercenaries and CIA bribes and God knows what going on over there for 3 million killed in the last 20 years,
So give us an overview. I mean, your chapter sort of methodically goes through each presidency, starting with Carter and the various wars, and we don't have time to get into it at all. And I suspect you want people to buy your book and read it, but
yeah, it's okay.
But start with Carter and give us an overview about how every administration builds on the next, regardless if it's Democrats or Republicans, and get us to where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, my mom joked at me. I made her read it as kind of like a proofreading job or whatever, and she liked it. She said it was a page turner, but she also joked that she was trying to keep track of how many times we changed sides, and she lost track of how many times we changed sides. But I would note that and you will note as you read the book, that the side changing is not dependent on the American partisan administrations changing from Republican to Democrat and back again. The changes in policy always happen mid-administration, and the next government always picks up where they left off and don't change for another few years or whatever it is. So, for example, to skip ahead, but as one illustrative example, when Barack Obama was backing al-Qaeda in Syria for 5 years, that wasn't because he was a secret Muslim from Kenya who had, his government had been infiltrated by the Muslim Brotherhood with Grover Norquist and all this like crazy Frank Gaffney stuff. It had nothing to do with that. Barack Obama had picked up that exact same policy from George W. Bush. And all he was doing was carrying it forward. Now, if you look at it from a partisan lens, you're going, why is Obama doing this? But if you're just looking at it from a non-interventionist lens, well, it's really easy to see why he's doing it. He's doing it for the same reason Bush did it, which was to try to make up for Bush's previous mistake in that case. And so you see how it goes. The changes in the policy as we flip back and forth are not really dependent on the administration, but on the results of their screw-ups. So just I can try to go super fast forward. How much time do we have here? We're doing another.
We got about 15 more minutes.
Oh, okay. So I'll do the super fast forward version here. And by the way, this is another thing. This isn't a secret history. It's just kind of an alternative history. So I'm not telling you about secret operation something or other you never heard of that has all this like, you know, overwhelming detail about some kind of stuff. It's not like that. Everybody knows that Ronald Reagan backed Saddam Hussein against Iran in the 1980s, right? I'm not blowing the lid off of that. I'm just trying to show you the through line of why it makes sense and how you're to understand that in reference to the Carter years and the Bush years that came after, et cetera, like that. So that's all it is. But I think it really helps to clarify some things. So what it is Carter's got three things. He's got the Iranian Revolution, and then he's got his plan to deliberately bait the Soviets into invading Afghanistan in order to help bog them down and bleed them to bankruptcy. And then he has the reaction to that working, which is, the Soviets invade Afghanistan. They might go to Iran next. So then he declares the Carter Doctrine and says the Persian Gulf is an American lake. Soviet Union, don't you dare invade Iran or we'll go to war over it now. Even though we just lost Iran, we're afraid that Russia's going to grab it. So they announced the Carter Doctrine, but that also means building up bases on the Arabian Peninsula and backing Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran beginning of 1980. Okay, then Ronald Reagan comes in. He continues these policies of the Carter Doctrine, building up the bases, supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which includes a bunch of Arab Afghans, not just Afghan Mujahideen, but the Arab Afghan army, they called it, of Muslims from all around the world, and especially the Middle East, who went to help them fight, including, of course, Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri and the later leaders of al-Qaeda. And then continued to back Saddam Hussein against Iran to contain the Iranian Revolution. Then, as we all know, there was a dispute over war debts at the end of the Iran-Iraq War, and Iraq invaded Kuwait. And then America launched Iraq War I to force Iraq back out again. And somewhat known, it's not really secret history, but it's lesser known history, is the great uprising of the Shiites and the Kurds against Saddam Hussein after Iraq War I. And George Bush Sr. had encouraged that. But then he changed his mind. He stabbed them in the back and he let Saddam Hussein kill 100,000 of them to suppress the revolution. You remember the movie Three Kings with Marky Mark and Ice Cube and George Clooney? That's the setting of that movie, is this attempted and then failed Shiite uprising is going on in the background. This is in the aftermath of Iraq War I. Just to try to clue people back in, tie them back into what we're talking about here. But then, so why did Bush Sr. stab them in the back? He stabbed them in the back because Iraqis who'd taken Iran's side in the Iran-Iraq War, that Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan had supported Saddam Hussein against Iran, they started coming across the border to lead the revolution. And these were the Reaganites. It was Bush Sr.'s government. But these are the same Reaganites. And they realized, oh, wait a minute. We're now reversing our policy. We just spent 8 years supporting Saddam Hussein to contain the Iranian Revolution. Now we're importing it. Oops. And so they called it off and they let Saddam Hussein kill 100,000 people to suppress the insurrection. Then they said, oh, geez, now we have to stay in Saudi Arabia forever in order to patrol the no-fly zones to protect the people that we just encouraged to rise up and then stabbed in the back when the insurrection was already over. It's not like Saddam Hussein was going to keep killing them all forever or whatever. It was just a pretext. And then they used that to stay in Saudi Arabia to patrol the no-fly zones over Iraq. Then the Israelis insisted that, now that you've weakened Iraq so much, they're not really in a very good position to contain Iran. So now we insist, America, you have to stay in Saudi and launch this policy of dual containment, the architect of which in the Clinton administration was Martin Indyk, who had previously been an employee of Yitzhak Shamir, the prime minister of Israel, who said, now we have to do this dual containment to contain Iraq and Iran both from Saudi Arabia. And this is what turned Osama bin Laden and the heroic Arab Afghan Mujahideen freedom fighters of the Afghan war in the 80s into the anti-American terrorists that they became. It It was because bin Laden was incensed. The American forces were stationed in Saudi Arabia, supporting all the dictatorships in the region, suppressing the price of oil to subsidize our economy at their expense, and supporting Israel in their merciless oppression of the Palestinians and the Lebanese. And it was just as simple as that. They never once said that we're mad at you because of freedom. I mean, think about that. You know what really makes bin Laden mad is that in America, they have freedom of religion to such an extent that in a nation of 300 million people, they tolerate 3 million Muslims living among them in peace with zero pogroms against them ever. Unless you count John Ashcroft right after September 11th, rounding up some people, but that wasn't really us, was it? But in America, where it's a supermajority Christian population, within Jews and Buddhists and people of all different descriptions, and Muslims are just one of many religious minorities in our country and are not oppressed as Muslims as such at all. Ooh, that makes bin Laden mad, how free Muslims are in America. Oh, freedom. How angry, that must drive a terrorist. Of course, that wasn't what it was. It was American foreign policy in the Middle East. And just as Ron Paul warned all through the 1980s, we're putting American civilians at risk with these policies. And just as he put it to Rudy Giuliani in 2007, if we think we can go around the world and doing what we want without facing the repercussions from that we do that, and he's speaking we as the government, as a member of the House of Representatives, that we do that at our own peril, at the American people's peril, because that's not true. People will fight back, and that's just the fact. So now here's the thing. They weren't just mad and wanted to crash into some things and kill some people because they did it because they were trying to provoke an overreaction. It wasn't just revenge. It was a deliberate strategy to turn America stupid and to exploit, essentially, our party in power's cynical, obviously, knee-jerk response to take full advantage of a terrorist attack against this country to go ahead and launch bonus wars if they could. We're not just going to Afghanistan. We're going to Somalia immediately, and we're going to Iraq in 2 years. And as George Bush said, oh, you know what? There's al-Qaeda terrorists in 60 countries. There's no limit to this thing. Meanwhile, the truth was there were 400 al-Qaeda guys hiding in Afghanistan. This was not a mass movement. This was a small kind of special forces cadre that was being put together to essentially figure out how to get America to do all their dirty work for them. I tell the story in the book of John Miller, who was the ABC News reporter who had interviewed bin Laden. He later became an FBI agent. And he interviewed bin Laden in 1998. And bin Laden said, look, I declare war against you and the Jews and the Europeans and everybody, and I'm coming for you. What are you going to do about that? And John Miller, he later told Peter Bergen that internally he was chuckling and scoffing to himself that, yeah, you and what army, pal? You and your 400 friends hiding in exile, freezing in exile on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan in the Nangarhar, White Mountains. You're going to take on the American superpower, huh? Give me a break. What am I even doing here? This is stupid, right? But the whole thing was all you needed was 20 guys to crash 4 planes and get America to do all the rest of it for him. As his son told Rolling Stone magazine, his non-terrorist son, Omar, not Hamza, the bad guy, his non-terrorist son, Omar, told Rolling Stone in 2010, my father was rooting for George W. Bush in the year 2000. He thought, this is a guy who will attack and break the bank and break the country. So he didn't say, oh, no, tough guy, cowboy, fake macho Texan going to come and get me. We better not make him angry. He thought, oh, good, the perfect mark, this fake macho tough guy, never been a fist fight in his life from Texas is going to, with all of his corporate connections or whatever. This is a guy who will exploit the crisis. I'm going to hand him on a silver platter for the exact same reason that Zbigniew Brzezinski proposed to Jimmy Carter in 1979 that America should back the Mujahideen against the Soviet-backed government in Kabul to provoke the Russians into invading Afghanistan, to bog them down, to give them their own Vietnam, as Robert Gates, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and Walter Slocum all put it back at the time, when they were launching this program. And all bin Laden did was say, I'm going to do that to you too. The same thing again and in the same place, and you're going to fall for it. And then so what was Bush going to do? this is all my dad's fault. Everybody knows that. This is all because of my new stepbrother, Bill Clinton, who, of course, Bush Sr. famously adopted as a stepson, basically right after losing to him. Within a year, they're like golfing together and the best of friends and all this stuff. And, oh, yeah, no, you know what it is? They hate us for our innocence. The better we are, the more they hate us. And so there's no one to negotiate with because there's no reason here. And there's, nothing to do except to declare war against not even Al-Qaeda, not even terrorism, but terror. Your presumed reaction to terrorism. We got to wipe that off the face of the earth, terror. And so blank check, 1,000 Gulf of Tonkins passed at once for Bush to do whatever he wanted. And that's what he did. And then, so here's the thing. I'm going on too long about this, but we've been in Afghanistan for 20 years. That's all he ever wanted. Okay. But then Michael Scheuer, who's now crazy, but used to say important things about this back in the Bush years, said that when Bush went to Iraq, this is the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, said when Bush went to Iraq, this was the hoped for but unexpected gift to bin Laden. Now you're moving the whole fight 1,000 miles west into Mesopotamia, and you're getting rid of the French beret wearing socialist infidel with the clean shaven chin, Saddam Hussein, who only worshipped himself, and turning a secular society into a sectarian hellscape, and which is all furthers bin Laden's goals of destabilizing the region, radicalizing everybody's politics and religious beliefs and every other thing. Well, if that's true, and it is obviously, then what do you say about knocking off Muammar Gaddafi in favor of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, or waging a half a regime change against Bashar al-Assad in favor of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria, that killed 500,000 people and led to the rise of the Islamic State and then Iraq War III to destroy it again? I mean, this is Osama bin Laden DMT trip come true, beyond the wildest dreams of Al-Qaeda winning every lottery in the world at the same damn time. And at last count, there's something like 40,000 hardcore real bin Ladenite fighters in the world, where we started with 400 20 years ago. And this is all just because of Bush and Obama. You remember, Matt, in the Bush years, Glenn Beck and all the hawks would say, oh, it's the Islamo-fascist caliphate, right? Remember Frank Gaffney? Oh, the Islamo-fascist caliphate. But then you spin a globe around and you go, well, where is it? Right? It's like the lost continent of Atlantis out, floating in the middle of the ocean or in the sky somewhere or something. There are nation states in the way of your caliphate. They're ruled by political parties. They have sovereign borders. Where's the caliphate? Well, George W. Bush gave them Western Iraq, and Barack Obama gave them Eastern Syria, and they literally turned it into a bin Ladenite caliphate, where that guy Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi up there on the balcony declaring himself the caliph was no different than bin Laden. That might as well have been bin Laden's nephew up there. Same difference. Up there declaring himself the Caliph Ibrahim in the name of God and ruling for 3 years. It was the USA that did all of that. Simple as that.
So can you put a number on the war on terror? Like, how much have we spent since Carter? And I realize it's trillions, but give people a sense for how this is bankrupting our country.
Mm-hmm. So now, just since September 11th and this century, it's been approximately $7 trillion. There's some overlap here with my statistics because I cite a study in the book where it was a geographic economist from Princeton had done this in-depth study where premise one was, we don't need to secure the oil over there. It's all been a waste. The oil supply was never really threatened in the first place. So this is all a big bust. And then he went and calculated it, and he said that from 76 through 2007, so a little bit, 6 years overlap here with my two statistics here, but from 76 to 2007, that we had spent $7 trillion that we didn't need to spend securing oil resources in the Middle East that were never really threatened in the first place. 7 trillion pissed away there, and then another 6 or 7 since then. And so sounds about right to me.
Trillion here, trillion there. It's today. We won't run this show for a couple days, but today happens to be President's Day, and I'm thinking about George Washington warning us in our farewell address. He famously, and libertarians love to quote this all the time, warned us against entangling alliances. And the way I think about foreign policy is not so dissimilar from that, because they had a very practical argument, which is entangling alliances will cost too much, and we're young and we're poor and we can't afford to do that. So he worried about the national debt, it's kind of a public choice argument. But he also basically said, we don't know enough. And thinking about the unintended consequences of regime change, things always get worse. You know, you take out a bad guy and a more bad guy takes over. Is that a mistake, or is it by design?
You know, it's mostly a conspiracy of interests, right? I mean, at times, yes, you'll have a secret deal between a State Department guy and a CIA guy to screw up a peace deal so that a conflict could last. Unprovable little things like that throughout, you know, those are the real conspiracies. But overall, it's a lot of people making a living off of doing the same thing and working together and doing it and telling each other how justified they are in doing it all. And as I learned on, I hope, the first day of psychiatry class at junior college when in 1996 or whatever it was, that attitude follows behavior. And so, you know, mostly people are interested in justifying what they've already done rather than coming up with reasons to do the things that, and then decide what to do based on the reasons. You know, it really almost always works backwards. And so you got a lot of people who are extremely vested in saying that, listen, the reason I'm a warrior is because I have to be. And the reason I sell these missiles to the government is because they have to buy them. And the reason I buy these missiles from that company is because, boy, we sure need them. Otherwise, what would we even be doing here, you know? And It is all justified. Also, part of it is because it's a democracy. We all learn in social studies in elementary school that the grown-ups talk about how things should be and figure out like what the truth is and what we should do. And then they vote for the very best people in their communities to make the decisions. And then those people make the best decisions that they can make. And so history has to be the way it is. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been this way. And so there's such a strong built-in legitimacy to all of this, you know, where on the other hand, I think this is why people always use that it'd be better if I could speak English, that red pill, blue pill analogy kind of thing, though, too, is that you could just snap out of it and stop believing in this stuff and realize it's actually kind of stupid. Yeah. I mean, that was what Ron Paul did that was so important in 07 and 08, right? Was he said, listen, he didn't ever say this, but it was implicit in his whole presentation was, you may have been under the impression that you have to be a hippie to be anti-war, that you have to wear, you know, Janis Joplin glasses and pal around with Jane Fonda and Michael Moore, or, you know, some horror show like him. No, not at all. Look at me. I stepped right out of the George W. Bush cloning machine, right? Southern German stock Methodist, Texas Republican congressman. And looks just like Bush from like 2,000 yards away or 200 yards away. I mean, you know what I mean? He's essentially the same cookie cutter of the identity and saying, oh, yeah, no, you don't have to believe in this crap. In fact, you'd be a fool to. You know, this isn't right. This isn't right at all. And people were like relieved. Oh, that's all it is. They just needed to hear it from somebody that they could respect. That, oh, yeah, were you feeling peer pressure? Did you feel like only hippies were against this stuff? And as long as you're not a hippie, you got to be for it? Well, that just ain't so. And millions of people took them up on it in an instant. Simple as that. You know what? I didn't really believe George Bush. I just didn't have anybody better to tell me better. But now I do, you know?
Yeah. And it's like the Ron Paul revolution, which was, in a sense, very lonely, certainly inside Washington, D.C. I see a growing voice in both parties, but more importantly, outside the party, that are looking at this as us versus them in terms of the Washington machine versus the rest of us. And I particularly enjoy the way that Tulsi Gabbard frames this stuff. And she's hardly a libertarian. And the only solution, we could end this show on a very dark note, but I'm going to try to bring it around to something positive. I think a lot of the partisan clash and the red pilling and all that stuff, I think it's an opportunity because people have the means to figure this stuff out for themselves. And your book is a nice distillation of a lot of stuff that can get pretty confusing. There's so many facts in these stories. I really wanted to bring that to people because you have to understand what's going on in order to push back. And I'm still romantic enough to believe that public opinion and informed people are really the only solution to this problem. I don't think the machine's going to reform itself. I don't think that Tulsi Gabbard was pretty much pushed out of the Democratic Party. Ron Paul was completely disenfranchised at the 2012 convention, and it just goes on and on like that. It's got to be outside. It's got to be upstream of politics, I think. And I'm hopeful because I have to be, because this is unsustainable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And you know what? Look, on foreign policy especially, there's real reason for optimism here. The people are with us. It's just not their priority right now. But as I said, we're talking super majorities of the American population are over it, and led by the troops. We got great groups of anti-war veterans now, like BringOurTroopsHome.us and Concerned Veterans of America, and of course, Veterans for Peace and all the guys on the left-leaning side too. And they just set such a great example. All we need is a little bit of prominent leadership, that can get TV time and that kind of thing to kind of galvanize the support. But, really the reason I wrote this book is I want to, Fool's Errand, my book about Afghanistan, it was a pretty big hit in the libertarian movement and I guess, somewhat in the anti-war movement. And that was nice. But with this book, I really want to get it out to the American people at large. Like I'm going to spend as much money as I can possibly spend on sending wholesale copies of this book for free to people who I think can help influence anything. Every AM host in America, any movie star or pop star who has important opinions at all other than just garbage, you know what I mean? Or just whatever I can do. I really want this out there because I want people to have this conversation that starts even, this is a marginal thing, but that's all I can do, right? But if I can, on the margin, I can have people talking about, there's this new book out that says that it doesn't have to be this way, and we could just quit this now and it'd be fine. That's all I want. I want people telling each other, there's this new book out that says we don't have to believe in this crap. It's just not true. Read it. It's easy. I really want it to be 150 pages, so there's no way you could refuse to read it, but it turned out to be 300 anyway, sorry. But it should be quick and easy. It's supposed to be a page turner. My last book had 1,300 citations in it. This has none. It's just whatever I could embed in the text. Otherwise, just trust me or don't. But I'm just telling you a story. You can Google every claim I make in there easy enough. But I wrote it to try to be as readable as possible, not just for you, but for your friend and your friend's Uncle Bob and the lady down at the Walgreens and everybody to understand this stuff,
Yeah.
And get over it.
Yep. Enough already. Time to End the War on Terrorism by Scott Horton. Scott, where can people find you and the stuff that you're doing so that they can dig into this if they're interested?
Okay, so that's a long answer coming up here. First of all, I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com, and I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, which, by the way, our big fund drive kicked off today. That's me and the heroic and legendary Sheldon Richman, and also the rising libertarian firebrand Pete Quinones, and the great Kyle Anzalone, and a lot of other great writers and podcasters there, libertarianinstitute.org. Oh, and a bunch of great books. My 3 books, plus 2 of Sheldon's, and 1 of the great William Norman Grigg, his posthumous book, No Quarter, and more great books coming out this year, libertarianinstitute.org there. And then I've got 5,400 and something interviews for you going back to 2003 at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And at the latter there, we have a brand new video series. It's a video adaptation of the new book, Enough Already. And it also has 14 chapters. And it's me going through all the wars from Jimmy Carter all the way through. And so far, we're up through chapter 9 out of 14 right now, which was Somalia is the last one. And so far, they seem to be getting a pretty good response. And so people can look at that, see what they think of it. There's a playlist there at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And then I'm on the radio in Los Angeles every Sunday morning on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. And I think that's it.
Cool. I discovered the video series. I think that's genius to translate them into shorter consumable videos, because our theory at Free the People, which seems to be borne out by experimentation and data, is that young people love to binge watch things on Netflix and things like that. So that, and we'll do our part to share the videos, and I'll put this a link to your new book out there. And I really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much for having me, Matt.
That was amazing. Where can I get more content just like that? It's a great question. You're clearly a discerning consumer of the best content. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, and click the bell. And if you're consuming podcasts, go to Apple, Stitcher, anywhere you get them. I'm in. Kibbe on Liberty, honest conversations with interesting people.